Up next, we have Barclay Ogden, who is Director for Library Preservation at the University of California, Berkeley. So Barclay is going to address the question, what have been the major challenges of the California Audiovisual Preservation Project?
Thank you, Josh. Can everybody hear me? Good. A little up? Good, thank you. Okay, well, I do want to tell you a little bit about the California Audiovisual Preservation Project. But maybe I first should confess that my background is not audiovisual preservation, it's print preservation. So to some extent, I got myself into this sort of kicking and screaming, thinking that I could possibly finish a career in print preservation and have it over with, but no such luck. That it was time to get involved with the audiovisual work, and that was largely because a group that I belonged to called the California Preservation Program, which is made up of representatives of the various communities that are served by the preservation program sponsored by the State Library in California, that said that it's time for us to do something about this. So that was one impetus. And the other is that, occasionally you have a friend who's a liability. And in my case, it was Howard Besser, who just was the burr under my saddle over not doing anything relative to audiovisual preservation in California. So eventually I was able to do something about that and get him out from under. So anyway, this is the story of my part of it, at least to date. So we had several goals when we started out, and those goals we've pretty much adhered to. One was that we wanted to capture as much as we could of California's history recorded in analog AV media. And I suppose in some ways that might be more than for many places, because some of these media were invented in California, and so they were used much earlier than they were used elsewhere. So it would be no surprise that we would have more of this sort of thing documenting the 20th century. We also wanted to focus on unique and rare recordings, partly out of the convenience of not having to deal with copyright so much. Certainly intellectual property is an issue we had to deal with, but we were able more successfully to deal with that. That we also wanted to get a comprehensive story. That meant that we had to collaborate enormously widely. That I don't know what the numbers are for your states, but we have over 5,000 libraries and archives and historical societies in California. And to get even a tiny fraction of them on board, it's turning out to be a very large challenge, but one we're happy to address. And we thought that, given the challenges technically, and especially in terms of digital preservation associated with audiovisual materials, that we really needed to provide some kind of centralized, coordinated service that would enable the smaller organizations particularly to do what they're good at, which is providing service to their communities and staying connected. And we would do the backroom work of getting the materials digitized, making sure that access was provided, and doing digital preservation. And the other thing that we wanted to do was really, really focus on content creation. That we did not want to put any resources in developing a fancy website, a fancy front end, that we wanted to let other people do that. We did not want to minimize our costs for preservation by doing it as cheaply as we possibly could. That we wanted to ensure access, but we wanted to do it at the lowest possible cost. And we wanted to avoid creating any infrastructure that we didn't absolutely need so that we could stay nimble and that we could keep changing. So here are some of the numbers to just give you a sense of what we've accomplished so far. Our first effort was to do a survey, a voluntary survey of California institutions interested in participating in such a project and what do they have in the way of AV collections and what do they need. So that was done actually in 2007. And it wasn't until 2010, 2011 that we actually got our first funding. So it took several years of nagging and an opportunity that provided by Howard through the MEAP program at NYU to get us started down the right path. And as you can see over the years, the numbers have crept up, that we now have some 7,000 recordings available, and we have 108 libraries, archives, historical societies, and museums participating in the project so far. That's sort of like herding 108 turtles. Everybody has different needs, and everybody's hand has to be held in a different way in order for us to get the job done. And you would perhaps not be surprised, although I insisted on being surprised, that at the number of people who could not handle metadata. And I don't mean the technical metadata, I mean the basic metadata. So we've done quite a bit of work centrally to enable people to participate, done a lot of teaching and a lot of training as part of the project that we hadn't originally anticipated we'd have to do. And those 7,000 recordings so far have had 1.7 million streams. We're only streaming the material. It's not available for download. That was another way that we avoided that, having to deal with the issue of people stealing stuff that belonged to somebody else. So, if you'd like to know anything about the documentation on the project, it's pretty fully documented at calpreservation.org, which is the website for the California Preservation Program. So finally coming around to Josh's question, that what have been the project challenges? And I could think of 4 that I wanted to share with you. A couple because we've had wonderful successes, and a couple because they remain yet to be solved. And I was hoping that this afternoon's breakout groups would give me the answers I need so that I could go home with solution in hand. So the first was collaboration in production and scale. Truth of the matter is that we can digitize as much as we can raise money for. And the reason we're able to do that is we outsource all of it to everyone in the country who's able to handle the work. That we don't do it in-house. We try to be format agnostic, so we handle everything from wire recordings to transcription discs to DAT tapes. So that's the way we want to be, because what we want to capture is the most important materials to be preserved, not the stuff we happen to be able to handle the technology for. So that's gone very well. The collaboration has gone well. I'm surprised at how well 3 people can manage 108 partners, turtles. The second area where we wondered just exactly how things were going to go was engaging a community. And I'm pleased to say that I think that we're making progress there. The first was building the partnership itself. That was an act of faith on the part of a number of the institutions participating, that they contribute to the project by identifying the titles that are most important for their communities. They send those titles to us along with whatever metadata they happen to have, which usually is not much, and in some instances it's dead wrong, because all they had to create metadata from was the label that was on the container. Turns out that the recording has nothing to do with the label on the container. So we start all over again for that group of materials. But the partnership has been building. At 108, we no longer need to sell the project. That people are finding their way to us, and it just keeps growing now, and I'm thrilled with that. I don't know that we will ever get anything like 5,000, nor do I want 5,000 to deal with, but I would love to have the important materials from every community that contributed to the project. The second is that the staff on the project, who, by the way, do all the work, I just am taking the credit, they would love to be out there doing the community outreach work directly. And so my biggest assignment is to stop them from doing that. What we want are the libraries and the archives and the historical societies in those communities to be doing the outreach, and what we provide is the backup support for them. because we want them to make the connection with their communities. We want them to have the history days. We want them to have the archives crawl. We want them to do those things, and they're doing them. And what they're incorporating are audio and, well, I should say, mostly moving image presentations as part of those events. And that's giving them the opportunity to say, now, what are some of your stories? So I'm very pleased to see that this little project that is contributing statewide to a renewed interest in the part of the institutions that serve these communities and actually getting out there and working with them more. And of course, one of the great things is that if they have, say, an oral history day, and they wind up with some oral histories, or they wind up with some still photographs that have to do with California, those become then the products that go right into this project. And we can add them to it, and we can take ongoing responsibility for providing access and digital preservation. So it takes the burden off of the library, archive, and museum partners that are participating. And in the third area, engaging the community, is educational applications. Probably the most interesting example I've got of that thus far is that the California State University system, which has 23 campuses and a huge student population, has a required undergraduate course on California history. The University of California doesn't have any such thing, and so I was surprised to discover that CSU has it. But because they have it, and because some of the faculty have discovered the collection that we're creating, they're starting to shift their teaching methods from textbooks to using the moving image and sound recordings as required reading, if that's the right word, required listening, required watching that for the students. And then they're given assignments to explore this collection. Okay, so those are the good things. What are the problem areas? The first major challenge is that we have been very successful, thanks in part to NEH, in raising grant money to do this. It's a huge challenge to get commitments from foundations, with one notable exception, and not to California, but the Mellon Foundation has been wonderful in terms of trying to draw attention to audiovisual preservation needs. But the foundations interested in California, we have not been able to crack successfully. So how do we do that? And institution funding itself. Everybody is thrilled to be participating in this project, I think largely because we're taking a nagging problem off their hands. Most of these smaller organizations have only Californiana, and so their stuff all fits. That larger institutions have much larger audiovisual collections, but they're not necessarily Californiana, so they wouldn't fit into this project. The last thing I want to mention is that what do we do about these gigantic collections of uncurated materials? And I'm thinking in particular of, like, say, radio and television daily recordings. I mean, an archive, could have years and years and years of it, possibly pulled from the dumpster, that possibly given by the radio station or the TV station. But these folks have never had the staffing to look at it. They have no idea what's there. Do we really need to save it all? That's one question. And then another question is, which is a kind of a curious one, would it perhaps be cheaper to save it all than it would be to curate it? I don't know. It's something we should talk about. And then another category that's similar is the oeuvre of artists or performance groups. An archive will collect every single performance that they can get their hands on. And do we need to keep it all? I don't know. I'm just a guy trying to raise the money. And so I look at that and I figure, oh my goodness, I could spend the rest of my career trying to help one institution with one of these giant collections. So thank you very much.